Are you wondering how you can learn more about food? Well, you're in the right place. This is the Chakula Podcast, brought to you by the Root to Food Initiative, a show that celebrates authentic Kenyan dishes and serves you hot conversations about food in Kenya from an economic, social, and political lens. Sema nasi kwenye social media at Root to Food on Instagram, at Root to Food on Twitter, and Root to Food on Facebook. And now, here's your host, Felistas Mwalia.
Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Chakula Podcast. On the last episode, we discussed about a very pertinent issue, the history of food and how food was a fundamental tool in the process of colonization. And one interesting fact that came out from the conversation is the fact that to date, food is still a tool for colonization. I'll link it below just in case you missed it. Today, we are continuing with the same line of thoughts, but with a focus on the state of the small-scale farmer. I'll be speaking to Christine Mungai. She is a writer, journalist, and a curator of Baraza Media Lab, a co-working and collaborative hub that provides space and carefully curated events and projects, all aiming to strengthen the Kenyan media ecosystem. Karibu, Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you for making time to join us on this episode. I'm so glad to have you on site today.
Thank you for the invitation.
To start us off, what does the world of a small-scale farmer look like for you?
A small-scale farmer, in my mind, in Kenya is typically a woman.
Wow.
Rural. Someone who has some land that she tends to, but really doesn't have a title or legal rights over it. Is someone who is very hardworking, tireless, determined, resilient, working under very difficult conditions with a lot of circumstances that are against her, but doing the best with what she can. A small-scale farmer to me is also someone who is very dynamic and innovative, picking up and dropping projects depending on how they are doing. Maybe this time doing chicken, another time trying her hand with fish farming, another time with vegetables, another time with maize. So always trying to figure out a way to make the circumstances work for her. But the system a lot of the time doesn't really support her to get to the full potential, not only of her land, but also of herself.
I really like the fact that you decided to say that in your world, a small-scale farmer is a woman.
That's the truth about the Kenyan situation.
Okay. A big challenge facing small-scale farmers today, as you have rightly put, is that the systems are not actually working for them. And you have seen many private organizations trying to come in and trying to help them out. What is your take on this and the fact that many organizations are taking part in fixing this problem?
I would say they are attempting to fix the problem. As you know, Kenya is a capitalistic society. So anywhere where there is an opportunity to make a profit, someone is going to try to come in and fill in that gap. Another big thing about the Kenyan situation is the attraction that it has for foreign companies and especially tech companies coming in, trying to put in tech solutions. Kenya really attracts that kind of company that is well capitalized, that has a technological angle, and that is also kind of embedded in the structural problems that we have in this country. One of those that I discovered and that I've known about for a while is 1 Acre Fund, which I first came to know about, I think 8 years ago, 2012, when I read a book that was written by an American journalist. It's called The Last Hunger Season.
And where can we find the book?
I'm not sure, because that book was delivered to my desk when I was a reporter at the East African. And the author's name is Roger Thoreau. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But this journalist spent a year in Western, in Bungoma, living with farmers and seeing how their lives, the ups and downs of their lives of being a small-scale farmer. One time the rains are late. The other time you're not getting that much at harvest time. A child needs school fees. A cow has to be sold. So just the normal kind of dynamics that we might be familiar with. What I appreciated about that book is the depth that it went to, and really trying to unpack and to understand how the system is actually stacked up in a way that doesn't support farmers. I'll give you an example. Most of the time when farmers harvest, they all harvest at the same time and they sell at the same time, which means the market is flooded with the produce, right? And so prices are low. And they sell it towards the end of the year, November, December. And in January, most of them have school fees demands.
Oh, yeah.
Which means that they're really struggling to meet these school fees demands. And they sell at whatever price is there because they really need the money.
Yeah.
But come March, April, May, it hasn't rained for some time, or, the harvest stocks are depleted. And so what ends up happening is that farmers end up buying maize at that time to feed their families at a much higher price than they sold it in November, December. So what that means is that farmers become net buyers of maize.
Yeah.
And that these same farmers are actually food insecure for part of the year. Farmers are struggling with hunger, with putting food on the table, which to me was the way that, all these factors come into play to make farmers of maize net buyers of maize throughout the year is something that, it has stayed with me all these years.
Yeah.
And to me, it was very eye-opening to see how, certain political and economic decisions make this kind of thing a reality, which I think is really unconscionable. One of the things that other countries have tried, I'm not sure how well it's working in Kenya, is a warehousing receipt system.
A warehousing?
Warehousing receipt system, which basically means in November, December, when you're harvesting, you get to store your maize in a good facility.
Yeah.
And you get credit against that, which means that later in the year, you don't need to yourself to buy the maize, but instead your maize is sold at a higher price. And so you're able to get good prices later in the year. Instead of selling your entire harvest at a low price, only to buy it later. To buy maize later at a higher price. So you can see this food situation is not just about farming. It's not just about productivity. It's also about the economics and the price system and how farmers interact with this kind of bigger forces or macroeconomic forces. So One Acre Fund is one of these companies that comes in to help farmers to boost their productivity by giving them certified seed, fertilizer, pesticide, and importantly, extension services, which means knowledge and information. This is something that when I traveled to Western to report on this story, I found that people were very, very disappointed and disillusioned by the local, agricultural extension and agrovet shops. A lot of the seed that people would buy would be, they would say fake. But
from One Acre Fund? Not
from One Acre Fund. I'm talking about from
agrovets.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is the gap that One Acre Fund has come in to fill. That people were used to, the heartbreak and the disappointment of buying seed that doesn't germinate or buying seed that has very poor yields. And I found people who had given up on farming until One Acre Fund came in and gave them seed that actually germinated and gave them a good harvest.
Wow. And what's your overall take on their strategy?
So I would say that One Acre Fund is filling a gap that is there, that exists. It's a real gap. When people say that on this 2-acre piece of land, I was only harvesting a couple of bags of maize. And then they go to One Acre Fund, get this seed and fertilizer on credit and harvest 30 bags. That's a huge change. It's a huge difference. And the thing is that the system is so broken and the bar is so low that even giving people seed that is reliable just makes such a huge difference. And this is something that a private company didn't necessarily need to come and fill, because government could have been doing that through extension services, through the Agriculture Finance Corporation. These are systems that used to work in the past but have been neglected or have been deliberately run down for political reasons. So I would say that it's an unfortunate set of circumstances, but the gap is there. It's painful when you speak to farmers and they say that we had given up on farming. In fact, I met one farmer who has an acre of land and she had completely stopped farming because it was like throwing good money after bad all the time. And what she was doing to earn an income was selling her labor as kibarua, like as a contract laborer on other people's farms. So you can imagine someone who has land but makes money by tilling other people's land. It's just, it's very sad.
aren't these farms providing services that are supposed to be provided by the government?
Yes, absolutely. 1 Acre Fund is providing services that the government used to provide. And I feel like in the past few decades, in this country, everything is so politicized. So just a humble small-scale farmer who could depend on agricultural extension services and reliable seed was kind of completely abandoned by the government, right? And in this gap is where these private, well-capitalized, often foreign farms come in to fill in the gap. There are people who say that there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, like, it's an opportunity. And what's the big deal of a company coming in to take advantage of that opportunity? And if farmers are not complaining, then what's the big deal?
I actually saw a comment on Twitter of a farmer complaining about 1 Acre Fund. And he actually wrote these words in Kiswahili. The person was actually complaining, saying, shida yenyu mtu akiwa na deni yenyu hata ya 500 mnamdai kila siku. Don't you think these loans at the end of the day, instead of benefiting the farmers at some point, they actually even lock them up? And instead of reducing poverty among farmers, at some point it's actually increasing poverty among farmers.
So this is what I would say. That farmer is expressing frustration at the aggressive collection tactics that 1 Acre Fund is known for. As I was reporting this story, I did come across farmers who talked about that structurally 1 Acre Fund gives these farm assets on credit as a loan. And so after the season is over and people have harvested, that's the point where you should pay back the loan, right? The loan that the seed, the fertilizer, the pesticide, everything that you got on credit. So according to 1 Acre Fund's own data, they have loan repayment rates of upwards of 95%. The latest figure, I think I wrote this story a few months back, and it was, above 95%. And I would say, if you look at the small-scale farmer who has been undercapitalized, neglected, and everything, considered risky, by other farms in the past, how does 1 Acre Fund manage a 95+% collection rate? What that farmer was saying on Twitter has been, expressed by other farmers, that the collection tactics are very, very aggressive. And for me, the thing that I would want to flag more than that is that when farmers begin to be under this 1 Acre Fund umbrella, it means that they are kind of, locked in this system, where every year you're getting things on credit and paying them back. And a lot of this, it's kind of hard to break out of that cycle and be independent. Because now you're in another kind of spiral. I would say that I think it worries me to some extent that a completely private farm could have such extensive reach and such influence and such tentacles in this space. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of farmers in the East African region. Hundreds of thousands. To me, it's just a huge red flag that one company could have such kind of influence, and that their whole business model is based on credit.
And my worry is that I'm just wondering, how about future generations? If our fathers keep on getting credits to get pesticides, fertilizers, and seeds, isn't this compromising our indigenous ways of farming?
Yes, absolutely. Compromising our indigenous ways of farming, and also really putting a big question mark on our food sovereignty. There's something to be said about being able to feed yourself, or to feed yourself as a country, in an independent and sovereign way, where you can make decisions about these kind of very important questions. I mean, if you're relying on a foreign company to feed yourself, and I really have mixed views about this. Let me put it this way, Feli. I have mixed views, which means that I cannot discount the stories that the farmers gave me that their lives have been transformed. Someone who used to be a kibarua now is farming on their own piece of land and has built a house. And she welcomed us into her house, was very proud that she has an iron roof on her, an iron roofed house now. And she just was talking about the way she feels like she's now being respected in the community. Those kind of stories, you can't really discard them because of these other questions. What I'm saying is that it's murky and it's complicated. And when I did this story, I really did not have a clear, conclusive way. All I had was these concerns. That, yes, we are saying that, I used to harvest 1 bag of maize and now I harvest 7. can you really discount that money that someone is making now? Like, this is 1 bag times 7 bags. Like, that's a real change,
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, in the long run, when you look at what this kinds of company means for the Kenyan agricultural sector and for food security, for food sovereignty, my story, remained with those questions. And in my view, I feel like these companies really do more than just help. They also exploit. They exploit those gaps. They exploit the lack of investment. They exploit the vulnerabilities in this sector. And any company that comes in to fill in those, to exploit those vulnerabilities, for me, in the long run, is something that I cannot unequivocally support. I have to critically ask questions as well. Yeah.
Okay. A bolder claim of these private funding companies is the "We Are Saving Africa" story. How has this saviors complex survived for so long?
The white savior complex.
Yeah.
Companies like this are very good at storytelling. Very good at storytelling. And when they come into a space like this, they come into a world where certain narratives are already deeply rooted and have already exist and are very robust. This kind of idea that what is needed to kind of fix Africa is a parachuted kind of tech solution. This idea of leapfrogging that everyone talks about. That basically Africa's problems are just one technological fix away. It's very easy in the world that we live in right now for a company like that to raise money.
Yeah. Sure.
And these firms are very, very well capitalized, very good at fundraising.
Interesting.
And they raise millions of dollars because they are very good at storytelling. It's because their stories fit into kind of global expectations of what Africa is, what Africa is capable of, the kind of place that Africa occupies in a kind of mythological sense for global imagination, right? These companies are very good at kind of situating themselves in that story. And so this is what I mean by kind of exploiting the vulnerabilities that are already in place. What would happen if companies like One Acre Fund couldn't tell that story? What kind of companies would they be?
Yeah. I have another question, but I'm actually taking you a bit back.
Yeah.
It's on these companies thriving, and yet we have organizations like Agricultural Finance Corporation have not been able to succeed for decades. How comes?
Well, the agricultural sector, when we look at it in a macro, in a structural way, is really, really an arena for politics. Not just in this country, but intensely in this country, I think I would say. An arena for politics. The reason why Agricultural Finance Corporation or, our agricultural extensive officers, that whole infrastructure has collapsed. And I mean completely collapsed. When I reported this story, the story begins with me being in Yala. Where, Yala town, very bustling, very busy, but just, a stone's throw away from this very bustling market is the depot for the National Cereal and Produce Board, NCPB, which is completely dead. It's deserted.
Wow.
Padlocks are rusting. I'm talking about completely deserted. And so when you see that, look, on one side we have a growing population, a thriving town, but the NCPB depot is dead. Tells me that this is a product of certain political and, economic decisions. To literally kill this sector, for whatever political advantage or expediencies that are factored into these kind of decisions. And so kind of abandoning the small-scale farmer is something that has, been done deliberately and politically. And for us to think about these kind of questions, not just as a question of food, but also of sovereignty and of politics, that politics affects us all, is something that I really hope that this kind of stories, not just my story on One Acre Fund, but what Root to Food is doing, if we can kind of raise our social consciousness about what it means to actually be food secure and food sovereign people. I think that's something that is really needed in this society.
Wow.
They are providing services that the government should provide. And was providing. And
that means nowadays the government doesn't provide that service.
Agricultural extension? No.
Yeah.
Like, when I spoke to farmers while reporting this story, they just expressed so much pain and disappointment
from the government.
At that feeling of being abandoned, of like just being left to their own devices and no one cares. I'll give you an example. One farmer told me about, buying seed at the local agrovet, which was, they thought was a reliable outlet, or they used to, rely on that. But every season, the seed would either not yield what they were expecting. Maybe it would not even germinate at all. Fertilizer being adulterated with gravel and sand. Completely kind of being abandoned to no standards, no regulation, no government presence in any meaningful kind of way. And so if this happens to you year after year and people really feel like they have nowhere to turn, and what do you do at the end of the day? You need to make an income. You do what you need to do.
Yeah.
You become a hawker. You become a laborer for hire. You do what you have to do to survive,
Yeah.
But that pain is real. The pain of being told that your life doesn't matter, your farm doesn't matter, your way of life doesn't matter. It's very painful. And it's a kind of pain that I think we don't really account for enough in our agricultural conversations. When we have this very capitalistic, profit-driven kind of way of thinking, and you say all that matters is this place productive? Then I'll invest in it. Forget about these other people. Which is something historically Kenya has done. 1965, Sessional Paper number 10 made this official government policy. It said the government is going to invest in high productivity or high potential areas, which says that if your land or this certain side of Kenya can be harnessed for whatever the government considers potential or productivity, fine, then we'll pay attention to you. And if you don't, forget about you. Like official government policy says that it doesn't really, we're not going to go out of our way to make a nation. And these kind of logics are still very much at play. In fact, Sessional Paper number 10 didn't only talk about high potential areas, it also talked about investing in people who are receptive or open to development. What does that mean for a nation? That we are categorizing certain people as open to development or receptive to development and forget about other people. At the end of the day, are we a nation or not? Would we talk this way about our families, our own children? I'm going to invest in people who are even our own families don't work like this. There are certain expectations of care that go beyond such, cold calculations, But I don't think as a nation we have reckoned enough with, the legacy of such policies.
What are some of the ways that small-scale farmers can begin to take back some autonomy and agency in light of little help from state agencies?
So I'm really encouraged by the idea of, something that we have been doing as people for the longest time, which is food cooperatives. People exchanging knowledge, seed, farming practices. I'm seeing more interest in, or a kind of increased interest in, reviving this kind of ways of doing things. It's difficult when you're in a country like Kenya where, capitalism is so cutthroat and, indigenous ways of being, indigenous knowledge is marginalized and degraded actively all the time. But I'm really encouraged by, for example, in a previous episode, you had Oyunga Pala here speaking about seed sovereignty that's true freedom, when you actually have control over your food and over your next harvest, He talked about women who come together to exchange seed, who have kept these food varieties and seed varieties alive because of the collective and the communal commitment to keeping these ways alive. I'm always encouraged that, Kenyans are very resilient, and I think a lot of times people exploit that resilience. But it's actually true. Like it's something that we always have a way of coming together to figure a way out of difficult situations. And so I'm encouraged also by the increasing numbers of people, millennials like myself, who either individually or through their chamas are getting interested in farming again. Of course, there are all these capitalist and global interests to direct this farming in a certain way. But I'm always very encouraged that we are people who are critical thinkers. We are people who, can deliberate and figure out a way for ourselves together. And so even with all this information that is pushing people towards this, commercialized ways and everything, I believe that it doesn't have to be an either or. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. You don't have to commit to these traditional ways and then never be food secure ever again, Or you're kind of signing on to a life of, poverty forever. But our ways, which include things like permaculture, which include things like biological ways of managing pests.
Basically working with nature.
Nature, exactly. And I think as a people, we need to regain our confidence. That's something that has really been battered over the years. Being made to feel like anything African is not good. Anything, we're always trying to catch up. And we actually don't have the confidence to say that we actually know some things, We are not waiting we're not blank slates or helpless waiting to be shown the way. I mean, it really disturbs me a lot when Africans are portrayed in that way, as childish, as infantile, kind of, as helpless, as waiting to be helped. And I really think we should begin to see ourselves as people who, have the agency and the autonomy and the capability to figure out a way forward for ourselves.
So the last question is, agriculture has been identified as a key pillar of our post-COVID economy recovery. Considering most farming is handled by small-scale farmers, is the state of our farming resilient and dynamic enough to generate jobs, enough food, and growth for the economy?
I would answer that by saying it can be. It can be. It may not be performing at its potential or at the level where it's possible. But it can be. Agriculture can be that thing that, with the right policies, with the right focus, with the right commitments, can get us somewhere. As I was reporting this story, I talked about the bar being so low and the gap being so wide that just providing reliable seed makes such a big difference. Something as simple as that. Small things can make a very big difference. What worries me is kind of the political forces that monopolize or marshal attention and marshal, certain firms have market dominance in certain sectors, right? So it's very difficult to figure out a way outside of these pressures. It's a high pressure and highly political situation that makes certain firms have outsized influence, outsized market share, an outsized voice. But I think our lives matter, our voices matter, and figuring out a way to a dignified life really is what I think our people just want. That's what everyone just wants, a dignified life.
I've picked so much from you, Christine. And one thing is, exploiting vulnerability is not a sustainable way of making progress. Maybe you can give us your parting shot in closing remarks.
I agree with that statement. Despite the bar being so low and the opportunities being so, just a small thing makes such a big difference. At the end of the day, when your whole business model is based on those gaps, and the question that one is left with is that farmer ultimately more independent, living a life of dignity and of agency, or are they trapped in a system and with forces that they don't fully understand and can't control? That feeling of helplessness and being at the mercy of a big firm with a corporate agenda is something that, in conclusion, we can't say that is, a dignified life of freedom. When you are at the mercy, first you came out of, that saying that says out of the frying pan and into the fire. It's like on both sides. You're either choosing between government neglect or being caught up in this corporate profit driven, being captured in that system. I don't think our farmers need, either of those choices. I don't think it has to be this binary that they're trapped in this situation. Yes. There is I believe that, together we can figure out a way that is sustainable and dignified, that, treats us as people, not as data points, not as, helpless Africans waiting to be saved or whatever, but really empowers people in a fully sustainable way, that 25 years down the line, this is what we can say about our farmers and about our country, about our ability to feed ourselves.
To feed also the future generation.
To feed future generations, exactly. So exploiting vulnerabilities is not the way to get there. And for me, that's what I would want us to leave this conversation with.
Yeah.
Thinking about it's not enough for a very well capitalized farm with millions of dollars in fundraising to come and solve our agriculture food problem for us.
Thank you so much, Christine. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. I have picked so much from her. I hope you also pick something from her insights. You can follow us on SoundCloud. Like, share, and leave us a comment. Subscribe on our Apple Podcast. Rate and review our episodes. If you have any questions, write to us on info@roottofood.org. We'll also be coming to you next Friday for more interesting conversations. Thank you.